Developers who were attracted to Solana in sort of those first 2 years were folks who really were trying to build stuff they couldn't build anywhere else on any other blockchain. And they needed Solana because they needed a network that was fast, that was, had operated in one global state, and that had really low transaction fees and really high transaction capacity. And so that original core group of developers, call that like the 150 folks who sort of were building on Solana in 2020 and early 2021, they were there for a reason, and they sort of fell in love with the network, and they also learned that you couldn't build the stuff you can build on Solana anywhere else. The Metaplex group took and sort of built an entire business and operation on top of, and that's the NFT standard, for lack of better terms, on Solana today. One of the cool things about NFTs on Solana is they offer a lot more programmability and a lot more customization than they do on other networks. And that's been sort of expanded out, where now we have compressed NFTs on Solana that use account compression. What does that mean in practical terms? That means you can mint 100 million NFTs for about $2,000. That is pricing you can't find anywhere else on any other network. For the Solana ecosystem and the network is that it's actually something you see in a lot of other places outside of blockchain tech. But whenever you take a technology and you make it an order of magnitude cheaper, or you make it an order of magnitude more powerful, people build new types of things you never could have imagined on top of that technology. This is the transition from, dial-up internet to high-speed internet, or 3G cell phone connectivity to 4G cell phone connectivity. I would say most blockchain foundations out there do too much. They're too heavy-handed in their ecosystem. They pick winners and losers. They get involved and they build stuff for the ecosystem and for the community. And that thing sometimes is all the way up to the user level, right? A thing I say day in and day out of the Solana Foundation is the closer we get to the user, the worse we are at doing our jobs. My favorite moment is when I go on Twitter and I learn about a new awesome product from a team I've never heard of before that everyone is really excited about and is like taking over Twitter today. It's such a great feeling to be like, oh, no one at the foundation was talking to this team. They just built something that everyone started to love and is caught on. And so I think that is kind of the stuff I really love to see, is that surprise to say, wow, we built this thing thinking someone would use it in this way. They're using it in a totally different way that we never even thought of before. But because we built this thing flexible and open and low level and without a ton of opinions associated with it, folks have been able to do things we never expected.
Welcome to Into the Forest with Pine. Today I have Austin from the Solana Foundation. Austin, how about you start off kind of giving an introduction of yourself and what you're working on at the Solana Foundation?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thanks for having me on today. I run strategy at the Solana Foundation. So that means a whole bunch of stuff from, new token 2022 rollout to some of the core validator client diversity work that we've been doing, to sort of some of the day-to-day work on just, how we attract developers and sort of grow this ecosystem.
Yeah, awesome. So the first thing I wanted to dive into was like developers on the Solana blockchain. So
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot of the developers on Solana are like really innovative and there's like a lot of stuff happening. So like, what's the philosophy of the foundation and kind of strategy when it comes to like growing and maintaining like a good developer ecosystem?
Yeah, so the Solana network launched in March of 2020, which is the depths of COVID, the depths of lockdown. It was also a time when people thought the scaling solutions for the future of blockchain were very different than what they look like today. This was during the time of a lot of L2 hype and excitement. This was back when Ethereum was supposed to have executional layer shards, right? There's lots of different theories about how this was going to work. But the developers who were attracted to Solana in sort of those first 2 years were folks who really were trying to build stuff they couldn't build anywhere else on any other blockchain. And they needed Solana because they needed a network that was fast, that was, had operated in one global state, and that had really low transaction fees and really high transaction capacity. And so that original core group of developers, call that like the 150 folks who sort of were building on Solana in 2020 and early 2021, they were there for a reason, and they sort of fell in love with the network, and they also learned that you couldn't build the stuff you can build on Solana anywhere else. And that ethos is kind of continued through. There are easier ecosystems to build on than Solana. There are ecosystems that have more sort of community sentiment and support, especially in the early days. I think now we're probably number 2 behind Ethereum in terms of community and global developer base. Um, but that sort of culture has stuck through, that you've got to have a reason to be building on Solana, right? It's not EVM. It's got its own language you have to program in Rust and using Anchor and all these other types of things. But that comes with a bunch of advantages. And so, folks who are looking to just launch a generic project on blockchain, historically they've been building in, other EVM compatible environments. But the folks who want to build something serious, that are thinking about scale, the developers who really come from Web 2 and they say, I want to build a product for 100 million people, Solana is the place they choose to build on.
Yeah, makes sense. So like NFTs have kind of been at like the heart of the culture in Solana, and could you kind of talk about like how that's kind of came to be and like how it's different from other blockchains?
Well, it's funny because NFTs are actually not originally part of the network at all, right? Solana launched in March of 2020, and NFTs didn't really come on the scene until September of 2021. So it's kind of funny where it's like now Solana is often known as like, oh, a chain where there's a lot of NFT activity, but it was just hardcore DeFi for the first year and a half on the network. But yeah, in spring of 2021, a group of us sort of got together and said, hey, we want to figure out what NFTs would look like on Solana. And we want to do that in a way that's not just copy pasta of ERC 721 or 1440 on Ethereum. We want to build something new, something that brings additional features, something that's maybe more creator friendly. And that project that a bunch of us worked on ended up becoming the open source repo that became Metaplex, that then, the Metaplex group took and sort of built an entire business and operation on top of. And that's the NFT standard, for lack of better terms, on Solana today. One of the cool things about NFTs on Solana is they offer a lot more programmability and a lot more customization than they do on other networks. And that's been sort of expanded out, where now we have compressed NFTs on Solana that use account compression. What does that mean in practical terms? That means you can mint 100 million NFTs for about $2,000. That is pricing you can't find anywhere else on any other network. And that's not built for a million PFP collection drop. That's built for games. That's built for real world assets. That's built for all these different types of use cases for NFTs that are beyond JPEGs. And so it's really cool to see like folks adopting state compression and building entirely new types of business models on Solana.
Yeah, one of the projects that I've been really interested in and kind of a super fan of now is Drip House. Like I've been
Yeah.
collecting that stuff every week, and it's really cool.
Yeah, and
So
they've flipped the idea of NFTs don't have to be scarce, right? They're not limited in supply; they're limited in time and duration, and that's one of the really cool things about Drip House.
yeah, yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of other ways that that can be put into use cases that haven't even been
Yeah,
thought of yet. Kind of moving to DeFi, what you were talking about. So like during the FTX crash, there was like a kind of a big drop in DeFi activity on Solana, but since then there's been kind of a resurgence of like new projects and stuff like that. Could you kind of talk about like what's happening in the DeFi ecosystem on Solana and like how it's kind of drastically changed in the past maybe like 6 months or so, or even longer?
yeah. So a core thesis that I have for the Solana ecosystem and the network is that it's actually something you see in a lot of other places outside of blockchain tech. But whenever you take a technology and you make it an order of magnitude cheaper, or you make it an order of magnitude more powerful, people build new types of things you never could have imagined on top of that technology. This is the transition from, dial-up internet to high-speed internet, or 3G cell phone connectivity to 4G cell phone connectivity. And on Solana, what we see is DeFi 2.0 on Solana is very different than DeFi on other chains, because transactions are cheap, transactions are abundant, transactions are fast. And all of those characteristics mean you can build stuff like Jupiter Aggregator, which is a multi-market routing engine that gets people the best price on chain they can get. That you can't build on other networks, right? On-chain central limit order books, whether that's through OpenBook or whether that's through something like Phoenix, you don't have central limit order books built on chain in other ecosystems. You have off-chain order matching systems, which is not really DeFi, I don't think. And so you see all these types of really cool new use cases on Solana. You also see these sort of hybrid DeFi, CeFi type products, like Baxis is one example of this. Baxis is like a tokenized whiskey system where they have whiskey bottles in a vault and you can trade them with high liquidity through Solana DeFi, but they still have this centralized company that is custodying those assets. What Credix is doing in Latin America is very similar. They're using blockchain to create anywhere between 50 to 75 bips of higher efficiency in access to capital markets, and that results in better rates. That results in better yield. But at the end of the day, those are boring, old-fashioned off-chain loans. They're just doing things like all the interest payout, all the payment management on Solana, and that saves them actually a ton in operational overhead. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening on DeFi on Solana. Another thing I would say is if you look at the sort of TVL to volume ratio, I think it's about 4.18 on Solana, and it's about 0.18 on Ethereum. So even though there's less liquidity on Solana, there's less TVL, folks are doing astronomically more with that than they are on other ecosystems because of the characteristics of the Solana network.
Yeah, that kind of comes down to like market efficiency, right? Like a lot
Yeah.
of times the order books are more efficient than like traditional AMMs and stuff like that.
Yeah, or just the fact that you have such long finality on other networks and you have such high transaction fees, it blocks out a whole class of user and a whole class of application.
That makes sense. So, kind of switching over to DAOs is like I'm kind of participating in this DAO called Deansless DAO, and I've found that like participating in a DAO on Solana seems a lot more integrated than like doing snapshot votes and other things like that on Ethereum. So, like, what do you kind of? And it seems like there's not a ton of DAOs right now in Solana, but like, how do you kind of see the growth of that over like maybe the next few years?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have not been involved in many DAOs outside of Solana, so I kind of want to flip that question back on you, and I'm curious what you mean by more integrated than you see in other places. I will say that we built out a whole bunch of tools like SPL governance, and the Helium Foundation has built out some really awesome governance frameworks for things like ranked choice voting and a bunch of the stuff that's just doable on chain because again, you have tons of transactions. But yeah, I think the Solana community in general does a nice job integrating things. But I'm kind of curious what you see as more integrated than other ecosystems.
Well, like it say you're using like Snapshot or something like that. There's like a it's not on chain, so like
Yeah.
there has to be like somebody who actually makes the decisions and actually executes it finally. So it's not really like a it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
decentralized, but like kind of not. You know what I mean?
Right. Like the voting is decentralized, but then it relies on a central actor pushing a button. Yeah, this is one of the main things that was built into SPL governance by Sebastian and some of the other folks that built that originally at Solana Labs is we want to make sure that when a governance vote happens, if it's program upgrade authority or something like that, the contract can actually upgrade that program if the vote passes, or automatically transfer funds if what the action is for it to transfer funds. I'm not sure why this is not the standard on other ecosystems. It doesn't feel like it's gas fee based or something along those lines, but I think folks on Solana are very committed to building as much on chain as humanly possible, and that's just like a strong ethos that the network has.
Awesome. Yeah. So a lot of people are like, I don't know, it's floating around kind of the consumer chain,
Yeah.
but can you kind of describe like what that really means and kind of how that comes into play?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for, gosh, what, 8 years at this point, we've been talking about what is blockchain's breakout moment? When do we start seeing consumer applications built on the network? I think that's a little bit like going back to the early days of Palm Pilots and asking, like, man, when are these things going to catch on with normal people? And like the answer was like the technology just wasn't ready, right? Like it was the pretty hard sell to, in 2007 be like, here's a Palm Pilot, like go bring this to a party and like it'll be a socially acceptable experience, right? And crypto was kind of in that space for a while. The transaction capacity wasn't there, the finality was too slow, the transaction fees were too high. You couldn't really imagine building a consumer facing application on it. The closest thing you could get to is sort of like a online banking system, right? And that is functionally what a lot of like what Bitcoin and Ethereum were used for many years. Was a replacement for wire transfers, a replacement for your long-term savings account, right? These sorts of things. But no one was reimbursing each other for dinner using USDC on Ethereum. The transaction fees were just too high. And so you start to see a network like Solana having all these characteristics where consumer applications can truly be built on the network. So whether that is Sling, which is sort of a peer-to-peer Venmo competitor that uses USDC and supports, I think, 30 countries right now in a bunch of different currencies, to the rise of decentralized physical infrastructure networks and Helium selling a $5 mobile plan to normies in Miami, right? All of these types of things are now possible because we have this fast base layer infrastructure for developers and entrepreneurs to build these kind of systems on top of. So Drip House is a great example. Drip House is like a consumer facing channel, right? It's not a marketplace, it's a content channel. It's functionally the same thing as a YouTube channel is or something along those lines. And it's really cool to see. I mean, they even stopped Drop Nation, right? Or Drip Nation. There's all sorts of like additional versions of that coming out where we're seeing blockchain become a content marketing channel and not like YouTube videos about what scam coin to buy, but like real actual product and product marketing getting done on chain. And I just think that's really exciting to see. And we might see a whole bunch of really cool breakout consumer applications that consumers don't even know are built on blockchain. Like they feel as fast and snappy as a Web 2 application. It's very hard to say that about most things in blockchain today.
Yeah. Kind of one of the initial things that attracted me to Solana was like, I was thinking, like, if we're going to get everybody to use these things, nobody's going to be paying $20, never mind $100 gas fees. And like talking to my friends and stuff like that, they're like, why would I use that? And so I kind of saw the like vision in that. And like,
Yeah.
how do you guys think about like growing the pie versus taking like TVL and developers from other like ecosystems?
So, one thing that might surprise folks is most developers on Solana did not start out developing on Ethereum. The vast majority of developers on the Solana network came from Web 2. They were folks who were maybe working at Google or Apple or something like that for a bunch of years, and then they decided they wanted to build something on blockchain and do something different. So I don't think Solana is certainly not parasitic to any of the rest of the ecosystem. I think partially it's not EVM, right? If you were like, I think you have a harder time making that argument about one of the EVM compatible chains against Ethereum, but developers have to learn something new. It's not the easiest thing in the world to just go from Solidity to Rust into programming on Solana. So a lot of our developers are net new. And that's great for the entire blockchain ecosystem to see. I don't think this has to be a competitive thing. I mean, there's less than 1% of the world using blockchain today. I think we have a big enough pie to grow without trying to fight over scraps.
Yeah, fair enough. So, one update coming soon on Solana is like Fire Dancer. Can you kind of talk about like the current like specs of the system and how like Fire Dancer will kind of improve this?
Yeah, so I mean, soon is a relative term. I think we're probably a year out from FireDancer on mainnet, but it just hit testnet this year. So FireDancer is a new validator client for the Solana network, and it's been engineered from the ground up to be fast, performant, and reflect the Solana of today. The existing validator client, it has 4 or 5 years of work that's gone into it, but when you're building software from scratch, you can always make it more performant because you know what you're doing, whereas the Solana Labs client has been modified a bunch over the years. So we expect FireDancer to be anywhere between 10 to 100 times faster when it actually hits mainnet. Running on the same commodity hardware that validators run on today. This does not require a massive upgrade in hardware or horsepower. In fact, it actually runs in a bunch of the testing operations on slower hardware than most people run existing Solana validators today. FireDancer is not only a massive performance upgrade, it's a really big upgrade for the resiliency of the network too. So currently, there's only really Ethereum is pretty much the only network today that has more than one validator client. And that's really important. I think, some folks might remember this summer when the Ethereum chain uh, failed to reach finality twice for several hours. The reason that did not cause a wholesale halt of the Ethereum chain is because there were multiple independent validator clients operating on the network at the time. And so that's kind of the vision here for Solana as well, is when we have 2 or 3 or 4 different validator clients operating on the network, if there's a bug in one of them, it can't take down the entire network. Now, the network may fall back to the Solana Labs client and get let's call it slow, right? 65,000 transactions per second is not exactly slow, but it's slower than the Fire Dancer throughput could be. So fall back to a slower version of Solana while folks resolve whatever caused the Fire Dancer client to crash. Or if the Solana Labs client crashes, the Fire Dancer client can step in and take over. This sort of failover setup is pretty common today. Most big operators of nodes on all networks run some sort of failover configuration, especially on Ethereum, where there's multiple clients, both for execution and consensus. So there's a lot of options there, but I'm really looking forward to Fire Dancer. I think it's going to be one of those step function changes in the Solana network.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing that also really interests me is like the Solana mobile. Like I feel like the step in like people using like even the internet between using computers and using phones was like a huge step. So like how do you see kind of like Solana mobile and maybe like mobile like application development like improving blockchains and like being used?
Um, so sorry, man, I totally blanked on your question.
I
Can you
was
say
just
that again?
asking like
My brain literally just poofed. It's been a long
no
week.
worries. How do you like see like mobile development kind of coming
Yeah.
into play when it comes to building apps on blockchains?
So I think Saga and the Solana mobile stack was probably a few years ahead of its time. But one of the core ethos of this network is to keep experimenting and pushing the bounds of what's possible. So I think we all agree that the future of consumer focused blockchain applications is mobile. And that's kind of what the Solana mobile stack set out to prove and to build. And so there's all these tools that are network agnostic and also phone agnostic that allow like decentralized app stores and system calls into Android to make it easier to develop mobile applications both natively and through the web. And so one of the main innovations of the Solana mobile stack is this thing called Seed Vault, right? Which is basically a very secure way to store private keys on your phone. Because today, the existing world of carrying a ledger around with you works great for some applications. But again, like, do you want to pull out a ledger every time you want to pay for coffee? Or do you want to keep $1,000 in a hot wallet on your phone? I don't know. Probably not, right? And so the advent of the Seed Vault there was really designed to solve that problem. Now, one of the amazing things that's happened in the 2 years since the phone sort of started becoming an idea is passkeys have started to come on the scene. And passkeys give a really high level of security and biometric authentication to software systems on all these devices. And so a lot of the team that was working on the Solana mobile stack, they're continuing to work on cool things related to it, but they're looking at how can we integrate passkeys better into mobile systems, into wallet systems to create basically a seed phraseless environment that offers the same level of security you would expect from something that has a seed phrase associated with it. And
Okay.
I think that's going to be a really important unlock as we start to see more and more consumer applications and, quite frankly, more and more mobile applications get built out. Now, the elephant in the room is still Apple, right? Apple
Yeah.
is still very unfriendly of alternative app stores. Apple is still very unfriendly of crypto and blockchain in general. I think it's going to change over a few years. You've seen them really back down on right to repair. You've seen them bring RCS to iPhones, just announced a few days ago. Um, Apple is facing more antitrust pressure in the United States, and so I think it's quite possible that their historical opposition to blockchain will not last more than another year or two.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of going back to the foundation, like what do you think the best way like foundations can kind of support the blockchains they're working on, and like how do you guys at the foundation kind of focus on this?
Yeah, I would say most blockchain foundations out there do too much. They're too heavy-handed in their ecosystem. They pick winners and losers. They get involved and they build stuff for the ecosystem and for the community. And that thing sometimes is all the way up to the user level, right? A thing I say day in and day out at the Solana Foundation is the closer we get to the user, the worse we are at doing our jobs, right? The best investments the Solana Foundation can do is to help fund teams building open source, low level software on the network. And, the analogy here is like, I can be pretty sure that real world assets are going to be a big thing for blockchains in the future, right? Most of TradFi is real world assets. It's not actually like other types of assets. And so that's a huge thing to unlock for blockchains. Do I know that one specific company's implementation of tokenized real estate in one specific market is going to be successful? Well, no, that's a venture bet, right? The upsides are potentially very high there. The downsides potentially 100%. That's much harder for a blockchain foundation to make good, smart decisions the closer you get to the user and the closer you get to a more specific implementation. So, the Solana Foundation is focusing on things like funding FireDancer, right? Funding additional validator clients getting built for the network, building out new cryptographic primitives that are bringing things like confidential transfers and zero knowledge proofs to the runtime environment of Solana. This is one of the big upcoming releases for what's called Token 2022, but it's really the next generation of tokens on the Solana blockchain. And then looking forward from there, it's Runtime V2, which is probably also about a year out, or along with FireDancer. And that brings another huge set of performance improvements to the network. Because one of our key theses is that we do not know anything any better than any developers building on the network do. In fact, we often know it worse because we're not the ones actually building dApps and building applications for users. So we do a lot of listening, we get a lot of feedback, and we try and invest in those base layer technologies that'll be a benefit to, if not all, at least a number of different groups building on the network.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's
Why
sort of
like
like
push
this.
something?
I hear this term a lot that I'll actually correct internally at the foundation, where people are like, "Oh, we want to be founder friendly." I'm like, we actually don't want to be founder friendly. We want to be founder tolerable, right? We want everyone to be like, "Yeah, the foundation, like they're they're fine, they're good. Like they do good stuff, but like I wish I got a little more support from them." Because that drive to say, "I wish I got a little bit more support from them," the flip side of that is I can't depend on the foundation. I need to do this myself. I am the empowered actor here. Me as an entrepreneur, I'm going to go out, I'm going to build this thing. I'm going to set direction. I'm not going to wait for someone at the foundation to tell me how I should build my product. And that feeling of empowerment is really, really key. It sort of started in the early days, partially because Solana was pretty broke at the beginning, right? It didn't raise a ton of money from VCs at the start, right? It like we had to be very. I say we. I joined in January of 21. Like this is before I was even involved in the network, right? But those original folks, those original engineers and founders, had to be laser focused on what is the minimum we need to do to ship. Because if they didn't, they quite frankly would have run out of runway. And that ethos is carried through to see whenever there's a community team that can build something, they should build it. They should not rely on the Solana Foundation to do that.
Yeah, it also seems like it could create a lot of perverse incentives too, to kind of
Completely.
like want to like make you guys happy rather than the customer.
Sure. Also, like there's little things like most of us only speak English, right? There's definitely people working for the Solana Foundation that speak Spanish and French and Italian and Mandarin and Japanese and all that, a whole slew of different languages. But fundamentally, blockchains are permissionless and global. And there's no reason to think the best idea should come from a team that happens to be able to speak English and therefore can pitch it to us. We should see those projects succeed in the marketplace of ideas and then, off to the races.
Yeah. So kind of looking forward, like what personally excites you about Solana? Like what has you excited like coming up in the future for Solana?
I think the best answer I have to this, and the one I'm like most satisfied with, is all of these base layer innovations that are happening on the network. Um, my favorite moment is when I go on Twitter and I learn about a new awesome product from a team I've never heard of before that everyone is really excited about and is like taking over Twitter today. It's such a great feeling to be like, oh, no one at the foundation was talking to this team. They just built something that everyone started to love and is caught on. And so I think that is kind of the stuff I really love to see, is that surprise to say, wow, we built this thing thinking someone would use it in this way. They're using it in a totally different way that we never even thought of before. But because we built this thing flexible and open and low level and without a ton of opinions associated with it, folks have been able to do things we never expected. Um, it's not the most satisfying answer, but like genuinely, like I love these sort of like base layer research and development efforts that go on Solana, and then seeing 6 months later what people build on top of it. Like Drip House was entirely made possible by state compression. And we did not think anyone would ever use state compression in that way. We thought, like John Wong and some of the folks who were building it, in all of our conversations, we were like, games. Games are the main use case of this. People are going to tokenize every single item in a game and use it in all these ways. And yeah, there's games using state compression, but it's really been a breakout application for dialect minting stickers, Helium taking every single hotspot in their decentralized wireless network and representing it as an NFT. And then Drip House, dropping over 50 million NFTs to its users via this system. Never thought that was going to happen. And that's what I mean by like, we are definitely not the smartest people in the room when it comes to what people are going to build on Solana.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of going back to yourself, like being in crypto is not necessarily like a consensus thing, and there's a lot of kind of bad like press on it and all sorts of stuff. So like, what drove you to kind of start working in crypto, and kind of like why are you in crypto?
I think this is one of the few places that, at least in the United States, you can work in a field that's full of optimism. When I used to work in Web 2, right, back in like 20, I joined crypto in like 2017, but like before then I was working in Web 2, and originally I actually worked as a journalist for NPR. Um, and what I found working in Web 2 and looking at the way that, Web 2 organizations think about things, it's all risk, it's all downside, it's all sort of, oh, this is going wrong. What could go wrong here? How do we optimize 5% more revenue? It's your classic Google testing 40 shades of blue to figure out which one would make people click more. And like, that's great. There's people who want jobs that are not that challenging, that are hard, but not that challenging. And they're, very easy 9 to 5s. And for me, I don't find that inspiring. I am not in crypto because it makes money. I am in crypto because I believe in the philosophy of this technology in a world where users are more empowered to make their own decisions. I think there's a lot of really great downstream effects on our politics that self-custody can have. That's 10, 15, 20 years out, but like we're in it for the long haul, right? For me, this is just the most exciting industry to work in because there's no gatekeepers telling you you can't do it. Or the people who are telling you you can't do it are just grifters on Twitter and influencers trying to pump their bags, and like they don't really matter, right? But there's a it's funny. I actually don't find that many people are antagonistic when I tell them I work in blockchain. I think, it might be different if I told them I sold JPEGs and I was an NFT creator or something like that. But like, I think a lot of these folks see the value of this technology in a way that they didn't a few years ago. And to that same effect, like I'm friends with a lot of folks who are, engineers or other senior folks at different blockchain networks. And while we compete in some areas, like I think the PvP on Twitter of like my bags are up and your bags are down doesn't actually reflect the ethos of the people building this technology. And it's really awesome to see like we owe Ethereum a huge debt of gratitude. Ethereum has taken a bunch of ideas that started on Solana and they have made them into something awesome that now is being brought into the Ethereum ecosystem. This is like collaboration and competition makes everyone smarter, and that again that just doesn't exist in Web 2. People from Facebook hate people from Twitter who hate people from TikTok who hate people from like there's just not that sense of open source culture and open source collaboration.
Yeah, I think this is a great way to end things off. Thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.